It might seem hard to believe, but when I was a child, evangelical Christians generally steered pretty clear of politics. It wasn't until I was in my teens, in the mid 70s, that a political awakening of sorts took place for evangelicals. Then, of course, in 1979, Jerry Falwell formed the moral majority, and evangelicals were off. But was this a good thing? One professing Christian writes about 12 reasons Christians should not be involved in politics. And he's written an entire book he calls The 10 Shocking Reasons Christians Should Not Vote. A little sensationalistic, and I'm not really sure his theology's that good either when I look deeper into his website. But the question of the day is, should Christians be involved in politics? What is the value of our involvement? Join me, because I'm Byron Harvey, and I'm just thinking. Well, welcome back to the I'm Just Thinking podcast, where we invite you to ask Jesus into your head. We're continuing today in our series I call Not in Polite Company, the intersection of faith and politics. And today we ask the question, what's the value of the believer's involvement in politics? And we also pay tribute to a forgotten historical figure named Marcus Morton. But that comes later. The question I want to ask is politics any place for Christians to play? Let's think about the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount as recorded in Matthew chapter 5. He said these words to people who would be his followers. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Jesus is calling his people to be salt and to be light. Now, what in the world does that mean? What did it mean in that day? Well, salt had a preservative value. It helped to preserve all sorts of things that otherwise would spoil. There was no refrigeration, of course, in the ancient world, and salt was the best thing they had. And so when Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth, I believe he was talking about helping to preserve that which is good in the world around us. Yeah. Maybe today Jesus would say, we need to be the Frigidaires of the world or something. Or, I don't know. But we've all likely had the experience, though, of the power going out in the fridge or the freezer and the spoilage and the nastiness and the stink. Well, I don't have to describe that to you. You probably can bring that back to your mind and would rather not. The world is in a natural state of decay, and Jesus would have us do our part to preserve it from evil to the best of our ability. That's what salt did. So Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth. He said, you're the light of the world. That's a little easier one for us to maybe grasp even in contemporary terms. Jesus said, you're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Light shines in the darkness. When I entered this room that I'm taping in, it was largely dark. So I turned the light on. We used to say, cut the lights on. That's a Southernism that my wife laughs at still. But nonetheless, the presence of Christians in the world must be like a light in the darkness. Salt, light. And so the question I have is politics somehow excluded from this whole idea of Christians being salt and light? I don't think so. I think there's a role for us to play beyond merely voting. And we're going to talk about that later on. I'm going to say something really controversial. buckle up when I get to it. I'll kind of give you an alert, okay? There's a role, or there are roles for us to play in being salt and light, even in the political realm. So, what does that look like? And I'm going to list several things to get you thinking today. First and foremost, we demonstrate a Christian response. We are salt and light, and I'm going to say a nasty word. It's not a 4-letter word, it's 6 letters. When we submit to the governing authorities. I think this is the beginning point. It is our attitude toward governmental authority. Here's Romans chapter 13. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Gulp. Some of you might immediately want to qualify what I'm saying. Oh, what if the government calls us to violate our faith? A couple of thoughts about that. Number one, remember that Paul wrote the book of Romans from the city of Corinth, and he wrote it about 3 years after a 16-year-old had assumed the role of emperor in Rome. Who was this pock-marked-faced teenager who was sitting on the throne in Rome? Nero, one of the most notorious Roman emperors of all time, a man of vicious cruelty, and Paul writes that knowing full well that the Romans are under the control of Nero. Be subject to the governing authorities, he writes. Yes, I understand there are limits to governmental authority. And we find in Scripture an example or two of when basically, I think these are the actual words in the book of Acts that the disciples said, hey, we have to obey God rather than man. And when the two come in conflict, I get it. There are times it's possible when government may demand of us that we do what we cannot, else we violate our consciences. And perhaps there then is a time, okay? But that's the exception, not the rule. According to Romans 13, the rule is to be subject to governmental authority. Therefore, Paul goes on, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes. Tax season, as I record this, is coming up. In fact, we're really kind of in the middle of it. We're beginning to get things ready for taxes, right? You pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render, therefore, Paul says, to all their due. Taxes, to whom taxes are due. Customs, to whom customs. Fear, to whom fear. Honor, to whom honor. Taxes, customs, fear, honor. We owe honor to our governing authorities. Is that the term you would use to describe the way you think about and speak about and tweet about and post about people in governmental positions, particularly when a person is in power who is not from your party? Paul says we owe honor to whom honor is due, and don't try to wiggle out of that. He's talking about governmental authorities, even when they act dishonorably, a la Nero. Generally speaking, the attitude of the Christian must be to submit, and it doesn't make a hill of beans difference whether or not your political party is in power. Not easy words to hear, but we're talking about being salt and light and obeying and modeling Jesus for the glory of God. Talked about that in previous episodes. Point number next, and I have 3 specific thoughts about this next point, but I'll put them all under this phrase. uphold truth. Uphold truth. There should never be a question about whether or not Christians are being people of truth. So here's point one under that. Always seek truth. Folks, this goes to our sources. What are your sources for understanding things political? Because I'm going to say this to you, and deep down, I think you got to know it's true. If all we hear is the propaganda from one side of the story, chances are we're getting a warped, distorted view of the truth, at the very least. Proverbs 18 and verse 17. The one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him. And maybe it's not too big a stretch to say it sounds good. The truth sounds good when we listen to one side, until we listen to a different perspective and maybe see that the truth isn't quite the way the first perspective would have us believe. Always seek truth. Before we speak, we're going to get to that in a minute, we should make certain that we actually believe what we're saying. That's kind of a different thing. Because we've taken time not only to investigate, but to think things through and reach our own conclusions. I'm going to give you an example to my own shame. As I'm recording this, it's a year and a half, maybe, I don't know, since the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. And I think people on both sides of the coin wouldn't shy away from saying that was kind of a mess. Some would say it was an utter fiasco. Some would say mistakes were made. I don't care where you stand on it. It doesn't matter. But when it happened, I put a post up on Facebook real quickly. I wanted to get something out there about it, you know? I had to be heard. And then someone posted a response to that, and it made me realize quite quickly that I really hadn't thought through what I'd posted, that I really hadn't processed it, and that when I thought about it more, I didn't even really agree, at least not fully, with the initial post I had made. So I had to retract it. I took it down. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think I posted a note and said, hey, folks, I wrote something on this a few days ago, and I've taken it down because, I don't really think I said the right thing there. That wasn't dirty or nasty to anybody, but I spoke something without taking the time to think it through. And I think that seeking truth involves that as well. But the preliminary question is this. This is the kind of the crux of the matter on this point. Am I more concerned with the actual truth, or am I more concerned about maintaining my narrative and advancing my political position? Folks, that's a very, very real and a very, very valid question for everybody to ask, Christians included, or perhaps Christians at the top of the list, because we should be people who uphold truth. Here's the second thing. Always believe truth. These aren't unrelated, of course. Always believe things that are true as best we can ascertain. There are people who regularly believe political lies. There are Christians who do that very thing. Regardless of our sources, do we exercise any discernment? Do we ever stop to think, maybe he's got an agenda, the stuff he's saying? Maybe the things she's putting forth are not exactly the unvarnished truth. Maybe those things have a bias to them. Maybe there's more to this story than this particular person is letting on. Do we listen carefully and critically to every political speaker? Does what we allow ourselves to believe pass not only the sniff test? Sometimes you hear things said, you can just immediately, that's baloney. Come on, that's ridiculous. That is not true. There's no way that's true. That's the sniff test. But I wonder further than that, do we allow ourselves, the things we allow ourselves to believe, do they stand up under rigorous questions? Because if I've got questions that you have no idea what the answer to might be about one of your political beliefs, maybe you ought to think about it a little more deeply till you can figure out an answer. Okay? Because if what we believe can't handle questions, that's a good sign that perhaps we have placed our faith in falsehoods. Well, hi, friends. Since I don't have a sponsor, I decided I would sponsor the podcast myself. Yeah, that's right. This is a commercial for me. Well, not actually for me as a person, but for me as a national instructor of Walk Through the Bible. Walk Through is a ministry dedicated to igniting a passion for God's Word. The cool thing is how Walk Through does it. The main centerpiece Walk Through teaching tool is live events that are hosted by churches or Christian schools, etc. I teach what's called OT Live, which is a 3-hour event where we walk through the big picture of the entire Old Testament so that we see how all of the major people, places, and events fit into that big picture. Sort of like when you work a puzzle. You dump out the box and all the puzzle pieces are sitting on the table, but how do you know where they all fit together? That's easy. You put the cover of the puzzle box right in front of you so you can see what the final picture is supposed to look like, and then you figure out where the pieces fit. A lot of Christians have those puzzle pieces floating around in their minds, but they don't really understand how and where they fit. Walk Through is like the cover of the puzzle box, so that in a morning's time, you can see how it all fits together. And here's the cool thing. You won't be furiously scribbling notes into a book like you're at some boring seminar. OT Live is the most active learning experience I dare say you'll ever have. And stuff will stick in your brain better than that notebook that you stick on a shelf somewhere and forget all about. I would love to speak with you and with your church or Christian school, or you name it, about how I could come and share this incredibly fun learning time with you. So, always seek truth, always believe truth as best we can ascertain, always speak truth, again, as best we understand it. And I'll add this corollary. When we come to find out we have spoken untruth, or even things that we may think might be true, but we really can't substantiate them and our sources aren't that good, we need to unconditionally retract that untruth. I see Christians on a regular basis posting things online that just don't stand up to questioning, and that are not sourced with believable sources. James 1:19, one of the most important and practical things in Scripture, says we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. How many professing Christians, when it comes to political things, do the exact opposite? They're quick to get angry because they've listened to some political rabble-rouser. They're quick to run their mouths, or they're tweeters, and they're slow to listen to anybody who might offer a differing viewpoint. I wonder, are we quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry? Or are we the exact opposite sometimes when it comes to politics? I didn't say it was easy to do. I'm just saying it's Scripture. Folks, there have been some public Christians, let's leave it that generic, okay? public Christians who have simply told political lies. And there is no other way to say it. Some of them have big microphones, some of them have big audiences, and they've said things that are simply and demonstrably untrue. It is shameful, and it damages our witness for Christ. Better to not be involved politically than to damage our testimony for Jesus. Rather, we should not only speak truth, but we should winsomely advocate for Christian principles, such that we help people, even people who aren't followers of Jesus, to understand the value of Christian principles as they might come to apply to politics. That doesn't mean that our every political question is one we could easily derive from the Bible. That's something else we'll talk about down the line. I mean, go to the Bible and tell me what the tax rate should be, or even tell me if there ought to be an IRS, or how we should pay taxes. Not there. Yeah. Immigration policy is complex and multifaceted. It's not a simplistic thing. And we can't simply go to Scripture and answer all of those nuances. Sorry. But there are principles of justice, fairness, freedom, respect for human life and human dignity. There are issues related to the family and to human society that we can derive from the Scripture, and we should winsomely advocate for these in the public square. So a key value in Christian political involvement is to uphold truth by seeking it, by believing it, and by speaking it to the degree possible. Related to this is another thing. We're talking about speaking. We should speak with what I'm going to call prophetic authority, in this sense that we should call out leaders when they act in ways contrary to the common good, when they advocate for laws that fail to treat people with basic human dignity and with true biblical justice. We have freedom of speech, freedom of faith, First Amendment. And thus, we're not only free, but we're also, in some senses, obligated to speak truth to power. Speak truth to power. We have more means than ever before of doing that today, for good or for bad. Back when I was a kid, I'm dating myself here, I realize, if you're like 30 years of age or younger, this sounds foreign to you, but about the only thing we could do, other than talk with our neighbors, I guess, to express ourselves, was to write a letter to the editor of the local newspaper. I wrote my first when I was 13 years old. They published it in the Roanoke Times and World News. I still got it clipped somewhere. Yeah, I'm a pack rat. I get it. Thank you for that. But when we can use the new means we have now with conviction and with grace, we should feel free, being salt and light, to use whatever means we have to call out excesses, to call out wrongs, to call out injustices, etc. While my one voice may not amount to much, if joined with enough voices, things can happen. And note, similarly to something I said earlier, we have to be willing to speak prophetically regardless of party affiliation or lack thereof. Our credibility suffers, and sometimes so does our witness, when we will criticize one party exclusively over and over and over again and overlook the sins of our own. And folks, this happens all the time. All the time. What kind of credibility do you think you have if you can never bring yourself to say, hey, my guy messed that one up? And there's a corollary, or flip side to that. We should also be willing to praise politicians and leaders of either major party who do good. Now, I get it. This is difficult for hyper-partisan people to do because that same hyperpartisanship blinds us to the whole truth. Hyperpartisans exaggerate the good of their side and tend to denigrate anything and everything good done by a leader from the other side. I've lived through, when I was born, Dwight David Eisenhower was finishing up his presidency. He was in the last few months. John F. Kennedy was soon to be elected as president. I can say good things about every single president we've had since then. Now, I can say a lot more good things about some than others. I can find things to criticize about every single president we've had. Once again, I can find more things to criticize about some than others. But folks, if we would have credibility as Christians in the way we speak, we've got to play it straight. We can't just find things to praise about our side and all criticism about the other side. Okay? Basically, you might have to look hard about for some of this. I get it, fine, fair enough. But if we're going to speak with prophetic authority and speak the truth, we have to do that. There's one more thing I want to talk about today, and then we're done. We talk about the value of our political involvement as believers. I'm going to say something real controversial here in a minute. Now's the time to just reach in there and buckle up, all right? I'm going to start it off innocently enough. Vote your conscience. You notice I left vote until the very end? Sometimes we're tempted to think that's the first thing we do. That's the number one. Maybe it's the only thing we do. I want to suggest to you it's not. I'm going to suggest that more strongly later on. So keep that buckle around you, all right? Now we're going to devote an entire episode to the topic of voting later. You have the privilege as an American citizen to vote, despite the previously mentioned 12 shocking reasons Christians should not vote, okay? Now, I'm going to say two things right now that are both true. They might sound like they're contradictions, but they are not. And one of the two will very possibly provoke in you a very negative reaction. Okay? One of these you're going to love. The other one, you may well not. So I'm going to say this to you, okay? Listen carefully to all that I say, not just one or the other. My dear home pastor, Bob Alderman, in Roanoke, Virginia, one of the greatest men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. He used to say this sometimes in sermons when he was about to say something controversial. He would say, wake all the way up or go all the way to sleep. Don't get caught halfway in between and miss half of what I'm saying. So, if you're about ready to go to sleep, just go sleep all the way, all right? Or wake all the way up. Here's the first thing, okay? Number one, listen to this carefully. I mean it. It's true. Your vote is extremely valuable. Your vote is extremely valuable. I believe that you should vote regularly when you can do so knowledgeably. If I can't vote knowledgeably, I don't vote because I'm not going to cast an uninformed vote. But when I can do so knowledgeably, I vote every time. Your vote is a special privilege that many people on earth do not have. There are people who live under, live under dictatorships. And even if they have a vote, they really don't. It's all rigged. We know that. Our form of government works when people take part in the system. Many lives have been given to secure and protect your rights, including your right to have a say in the government, including your right to vote. Your vote is your means of having your individual voice heard. If you can't vote for one of the major party candidates, vote third party. I've certainly done that a number of times. If there's no candidate who appears on the ballot for whom you can in good conscience vote, write in a name. I've done that too. Those of you that know me won't find that surprising. So here's the first thing I want to make perfectly clear. For all of the reasons I've listed and more, your vote is extremely valuable and you should regularly exercise your right to cast it. Got it? Clear? Good. Here's the second thing. Ready? Your vote will make no practical difference. I'm immediately feeling the daggers, but I speak the truth. Your vote will not determine the next president one way or the other. It will not determine the next governor. It will not determine the next senator or U.S. representative. Unless maybe you live in a very, very small town and you're voting in the local mayor's race or some other very small election. As a practical matter, your vote makes no difference. I decided to check on this, and I found that there's one major election in the entire history of our United States. When I say major election, I'm going to say president, Congress, or governor. All right? One major election in our entire history that was decided by a single vote. It happened in 1839 in the Massachusetts race for governor, when the inaptly nicknamed, that's hard to say, inaptly nicknamed Marcus Landslide Morton won the Massachusetts governorship by a single vote. Of course, this took place when there were just over 100,000 votes cast in that Massachusetts election. Last year, Massachusetts elected a new governor. And when that happened, well over 2.4 million votes were cast. Your vote, friends, will make no practical difference. Byron, we don't want to hear this. Stop it. Well, it's true. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. Why do I bring this up? Not to discourage you from voting. Did you listen to point one? I hope you haven't forgotten it already. Vote. I do. I believe in it. I do it when I can do it knowledgeably every time. Rather, it's this. When we think of how we as Christians should be involved in politics, listen to the medicine I'm about to give you. Voting is almost certainly the least impactful way we can do it. So what matters more? What matters more is the way we treat people made in the image of God who might disagree with us politically. That matters more. What matters more is the way we seek and believe and speak truth in the many forums available to us to do so politically. What matters more is the way we winsomely, by word, by deed, and by attitude, demonstrate a Christian ethic and approach to the whole subject of politics. What matters more? The way we hold our own side to the same standards as we hold the other side. What matters more? The way we speak truth to power. What matters more? The way we behave as salt and light as Jesus calls us to. So is there a place for Christians to be involved in politics? As we act as followers of Jesus, faithful to his call, I absolutely believe that to be the case. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm doing this series. And that's why I hope you'll come back next time. But for now, I'm Byron Harvey, and I'm just thinking.